This is Conversations with Barbara, and my guest today is Mhadavi Venkatesan, who is the founder of Sustainable Practices Cape Cod. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the program, Mother.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I appreciate your having me.
Now, before we talk about a problem that concerns all of us, that is food waste, tell our viewers something about the organization that you founded, Sustainable Practices Cape Cod. Tell us about the work that's being done there.
Sure, I'm happy to. Sustainable Practices was established in 2016, so I founded it in 2016 with the intention of trying to figure out how I could actually promote and disseminate greater information and understanding about sustainability, because there seemed to be such a disconnect between people's perceptions of what sustainability really meant and the lifestyle changes that really needed to happen in order to promote it. So sustainability is fundamentally a worldview. It has to do with how we perceive ourselves within the world and our responsibilities to it. And also has to fundamentally do with a shift between our current economic system, which looks at the environment as being a resource for human use, as opposed to being a resource that we live in symbiosis with and also have a responsibility to steward, which is what sustainability is more aligned to. So in the first year, I really didn't do much because I was just starting off. But in September of 2017, I worked with the Chatham Orpheum Theater, and we started a film series. And they were my sponsor organization, and we showed sustainability-based films the first Saturday of every month. And I never really thought about how successful they were because I always wanted to get the message out. But we had people coming as far from Bourne, all the way from Lower Cape, from Provincetown to see the films. And we'd have on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning, about 50 to 100 people show up for that one single showing of the film, where the revenue that was generated really assisted us. In the fall of 2018, because in 2018, I showed a film called Divide and Conquered, which basically changed my perceptions about what the next step would be for the organization. Divide and Conquered is a documentary film that documents the work of Jean Hill, who basically has established the first single-use plastic water bottle ban in the United States. And that was in Concord, Massachusetts, not too far from Boston. So I used that as a means of inspiration. And I took that film to every single town on Cape Cod. We showed it in every single library. And I say we, because at that point, Vic Roberts started off with me and worked as our communications director in that first year. In 2019, we worked with a pro bono legal counsel at the end of 2018 to start the filing process of municipal bottle bans, across the Cape. The municipal plastic bottle ban was a ban specifically targeted to town government use of taxpayer dollars in the purchase of single-use plastic beverages beverages in single-use plastic containers being sold on town property. We prohibited that because what we said is the government, in recognition that plastic is a negative, is a toxin to human health, should not be using taxpayer dollars in order to be able to purchase a product that has obviously questionable use value, especially given that we're in a coastal community. And we passed that at the end of 2019 in 13 towns. I say passed, but we also, some towns actually adopted it as a policy as opposed to voting on town meeting floor. Yeah. But then we started in 2020 with the commercial single-use plastic water bottle ban, which is what is currently in place. We have passed in 9 towns, which this particular bottle ban eliminates single-use plastic water bottles with non-flavored, non-carbonated drinking water of less than 1 gallon of size of being sold in any town that passes it. And so right now we have representation in that in Falmouth, Sandwich, Dennis, Brewster, Orleans, Harwich, Eastham, Wellfleet, and Provincetown. And we still have Chatham and we have Chatham and Yarmouth, left for this spring to vote. The actual municipal ban we've now had adopted in 14 towns. Bourne actually adopted it at their spring town meeting a couple of weeks ago. And so Truro was the last town. When they pass, hopefully they will pass in June, we will have all 15 towns in adoption of the municipal ban. And hopefully with Chatham and Yarmouth, 11 towns with the commercial single-use plastic water bottle ban. We'll go after the other 4 towns, hopefully this year, with the assistance of our general Cape community, because this is an important first step in terms of really starting to think about the life cycle impact of our plastic usage.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sure the members are feeling quite good about those successes. And you, Falmouth member of Sustainable Practices, was the petitioner here in Falmouth for the passing of that. It was passed at town meeting, which was pretty exciting. So, well, then let's talk then about a huge problem, food waste. It seems to me that it concerns all of us. Most of us are guilty of this. It's become mindless and almost without even just a habit, something that has become just normal. And your view is that it shouldn't be and needn't be. Tell us more about how food waste can be stopped.
Well, I think the first and most important thing is, we can't really have any conversation about anything related to products that we purchase without thinking, and even how we look at people, without thinking about our economic system. Our economic system basically puts a dollar value on things as opposed to our sense of what something is worth. And because of that, there's a dichotomy, what you pay for and the real value of something. So one basic element is that we take life to have life. And I think that's a really important aspect of thinking about our engagement with food. Food is a living thing, whether it be a plant or animal. We are consuming something that is life. So in that perspective, it is a value to itself, number one. And number two, given that we need food to live, it has probably greater value than the clothes on our back because we cannot survive without it. Yet, the price does not necessarily indicate either the value of that item that's actually we're consuming that was alive, nor does it take into consideration that this is something we really need to live. So we pay very cheap prices for our food, and that does two negative things for us. One is the value that we place on it is equivalent to the price we pay. So we pay very little, we have no problem throwing it away. And so the unfortunate thing in that is that particular aspect of putting a quantitative market value on things has affected our perception of the value of almost everything. Because if we don't pay a lot for it, we don't feel like it's worth very much. Therefore, it's okay to dispose. But at the same time, then when we say we need to pay more for it, we're not comfortable paying more for something because we think it's too expensive, but we're not taking into consideration the real value of what we need from it. Nutritious, healthy food is what keeps us sustained. It affects our hormones, affects our mood, affects how we interact with others, and that in many ways is the baseline of how we interact and promote a positive and just society. Because if you're happy and content and you feel good in terms of what you've eaten, that's going to make you a better citizen more than likely.
Yes, so that we really need to be then mindful of these things. Food is, in a sense, beyond price, and so that means that as consumers, we really have to change a lot of habits. Now, human behavior is hard to change. It's often been said that it's easier to change the circumstances rather than change the habits. But I see that it really is incumbent upon us to be mindful and to think. One of your writings, a quotation that jumped out at me is that convenience is a luxury the environment cannot afford. Expand on that. Is it convenience that is our problem? Shopping is too convenient?
Everything is too convenient. And again, it really sort of ties back to our economic framework. I mean, what we measure growth by in our economy is how much we produce. So that means right away, how much are we going to produce to charge people more so they buy more so that we can say that our GDP is growing? And so when you start to think about it that way, convenience-based products, anything that comes quickly to us, adds tremendous amounts in terms of a bulk or quantity in terms of economic or perceived economic growth, because now you have to, convenience products by their definition have a planned obsolescence to them, a very short life. So the more convenience products that we produce, they're coming at very cheap prices. That also helps make them convenient. But what they really embody are externalized costs that are not being captured in their price. And they also are short duration, which means that you're always needing more of them. Yes. And that mechanism is there to help promote the growth of the economy. So from just that simple perspective, we need to effectively understand and analyze what it is that we're paying for in terms of convenience.
And as consumers, then we can make a difference.
Definitely.
And so when we shop, avoid buying things in plastic.
Yes.
Yes, avoid. I think that we are lulled into thinking that well, if we can recycle it, it's okay. But perhaps we should think about something that doesn't need to be recycled. Which, what would you suggest then that people think about when they're shopping?
It's not that long ago. I remember when, I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States a few decades ago, and I remember going to the grocery store with my mother. There were not things wrapped in plastic. We did not get plastic bags when we left the grocery store. We took our bags and we went to the grocery store. Sometimes I think they started to give paper bags at one point in time, so we did pick up paper bags. But the issue is, it's not so much the plastic is necessary as it is the fact that we buy food that we may or may not consume. We're under the false premise that if it's packaged in plastic, the lifespan of that food product is going to last longer. So we buy for preservation needs. Perhaps maybe we change the way we shop and we buy based on what we're going to eat. That would actually reduce probably the food waste that we have in our homes, because we would buy based on our consumption. And secondly, we would use less mechanisms to keep that particular food so-called fresh, such as a plastic wrapper. Yeah. Definitely, people need to be more cognizant. The issue with plastic is that it was never made for human consumption, and the knowledge of how it leaches into the foods that we actually eat is still something that not everybody is cognizant of. So when you think about how we buy things that are packaged in a product that actually can leach into the foods that it's holding, and that those leachates can actually be health impactful. We know that plastic leachate is tied to obesity, endocrine disruption, fertility issues, cardiovascular disease, ADHD, all of which are elements that have been normalized over the last 40 to 50 years. And we just assume that they're just normal aspects of our lives now. They weren't normal aspects of our lives 40, 50 years ago. They have slowly become normalized as they've become increasing in the amount of incidents. So there's a lot to be questioning as to what we're consuming that's actually creating those problems. Also, one last thing just about recycling. Recycling and the production of plastic both create a lot of harmful emissions, and they both require more of the virgin elements that create the ultimate outcome product. It is a short-term perspective of thinking that, okay, I can use this product because it can be recycled, without taking into consideration the very much health consequences of those emissions, the health consequences, of fracking to get the petroleum-based elements that are the inputs to the product, or the monoculture impacts. If you're using a corn-based or vegetable-based plastic, those still are having adverse impacts in terms of just being a monoculture product that's grown just for the purpose purely of making this synthetic product, just being a so-called natural input into an overall synthetic product. They don't biodegrade, and majority of them either are landfilled or burned. Incineration more than likely is going to be an increasing element of our disposal as we move forward. So we think about it very simply. We need three things to live: oxygen, water, and food, all of which we value the least. And we don't think about the air that we breathe, and that's the incineration that we're contaminating. We don't think about the water, and that's like when we actually landfill any product that can actually end up leaching into the water system. And we are too busy focused on the convenience and price that we're not thinking about the quality of the food we eat.
Yes. So we've become complacent. I know that most people thinking about decades ago and before we had regulations, and we're shocked to think that there were additives in our food supply that were poisonous. And yet now we have become comfortable, because it seems that that plastic is certainly without regulations. We have to just be more mindful of what we're shopping for and what we're buying.
Regulations in general are really indicative of the population's understanding of an issue. People that we elect into office reflect and mirror our own understanding of issues that we want to have tackled. So a lot of this fundamentally has a lot to do with the lack of education in our general public with regard to what we're consuming, why we're consuming it, how it affects us, what are the long-term implications, and also potentially the false perceptions that somehow human technological progress can fix all the issues that we create.
Yes.
So I would agree with you 100%. I mean, it's not a regulatory issue because the government is only reflective of the people. It is a people issue fundamentally. Businesses are reflective of what their consumers want. And as some businesses understand that their brand value is tied to their sustainability objectives, they've become much more bold with their sustainability objectives. But it's really about the consumer. It's about consumers coming together and taking back the power that we've given away over a few decades.
So we are not aware of the power that we have, and we can change things simply by making choices, the right choices. And so what you're saying makes a great deal of sense. And there's been some indication that people are becoming more mindful. I have in cooking, for example, making a vegetable broth out of pots of vegetables that ordinarily we would discard is that something helpful to learn, that we can use more of the items, the fresh produce that we buy than we think we can, like using the tops of vegetables and roots and things of that sort in making broths and storing, and then cooking at home, rather than there's a lot of food waste that's attributed to restaurants. And
that's 100% true. What we saw with COVID-19 was specifically tied to that. When the restaurants and the intermediary elements that we would use on a daily basis had to shut down, all of a sudden you found this tremendous amount of food being wasted just to maintain price levels at where they were, rather than allowing the excess supply to hit the market. Which that tells you right there is that we produce in excess to allow us to waste in excess. Because the only way you can waste in excess is if the price is low enough to afford you the ability to buy food for your home and then eat out at the same time. So that way you can do both. Our economy is set up in a very odd way. And unless we actually sit back, reflect on it, and take just a few minutes every day to reflect on the choices we make, we may not necessarily understand how our decisions are actually undermining our well-being. So to your point, 100% true. Family meals at home, that's what I grew up with. But today it's so much easier to avoid family time at home and just eat out, or everybody go and get their own food when they want it. And you miss out at the solidarity of creating family life from that one simple perspective. But the other thing also becomes one in which you're so busy trying to get some from one place to another, you're not necessarily thinking about the quality of what you're putting into your body.
Yes. If we thought about that, the quality of what we're putting into our bodies, I think it would make us much more careful about shopping, not running into a market and just quickly grabbing whatever is there. It's going to take probably a change of mind and heart, but I think this kind of information is what will do it. And I like your emphasis on the power that the consumer has to it's our choices that will determine what winds up on the shelves of stores.
Well, the wonderful thing, I mean, I'll just tell you a small aside with regard to the COVID issue. One of the members of Sustainable Practices shared with me that he used to eat out quite a bit, but because of COVID, he couldn't. And he had to take all of these pills, after he ate, because of acid reflux and other digestive issues, typically when he would eat out. But eating at home, he didn't have to take any of those. His stomach adjusted to a different type of food that was actually more easily digestible and didn't cause him any kind of ailments. And that's really an important element to think about, because now you're eating at home, you're able to be portion control, what kind of oils that you're putting into your food, and what other additives and the amount of salt, how much you can control. It's unimaginable, right? Because a lot of people have issues with high blood pressure, but if they're eating out, they may be eating a whole lot more salt than they realize.
Yes.
But one other aspect of this is something that you and I had the opportunity to discuss on our own, which was the commercialized agricultural components. when you're going to the grocery store and you're really paying attention to what you're buying, you can start to effectively change maybe the quality of what you consume just by paying attention to where something is grown or how something is raised. Because we have gotten used to certain dietary requirements because of false perceptions of things like the USDA pyramid as being actually something that indicates the balance of foods that we need, not necessarily recognizing that the USDA pyramid, excuse me, reflects more probably lobbying efforts on the side of corporations with regard to the desire to be included. This is not necessarily what may be in our best interest in terms of consumption. Our bodies are actually able to eat a simple diet and thrive very well. I remember growing up, because I'm a vegetarian by culture, actually, more than anything else. How do you get your protein? But that's still unfortunately a question that people ask when you're a vegetarian. But where do animals get their protein? Protein comes directly from vegetables. That is the primary source of protein for every living thing, pretty much. And when you think about it from that perspective, you don't need meat to eat. And in fact, the US system, where it's actually deficient, is in fiber. And that's why a lot of people have gastrointestinal issues, is because of a lack of fiber in their diet, not a lack of protein.
Yes, and it seems to me that the notices that many of us get on our emails from the public health, for example, the Harvard Chan School, is red meat rarely. It's just not very good for us. And there's some protein in legumes and in other things. So this, we're hearing this quite a lot. And it would seem to me that adding to it the fact that so much food is being wasted, we can be more cautious for our own sakes. I think your point of view is that consuming ought to be an ethical, if not a moral choice, when we think about respect for animals that we use as food. That wasting that, I believe you have written about this, that the animal is slaughtered for our sake and then we throw half of it away. It seems a lack of respect for life itself.
Exactly. That is exactly what we're guilty of. It doesn't resonate with everyone. And I say this because, as you know, Barbara, I'm also a college professor. And so I bring up these topics with my classes as well. You know, with understanding that you're taking life for life, change your perception of your consumption of that life. And my students say that it should, you know, a lot of times, but unfortunately it won't, because most people have become desensitized to the life of what they consider lower animals, because we've been taught that we are the dominant species on this planet. So therefore all other animals have less value than us. So that perhaps is a fundamental initial flaw in our thinking, is that somehow because something is ranked lower than you, its value is less, or its feelings are less valuable. And perhaps maybe that's the beginning point of really being sustainable, is to start to think about the fact that just because you can't perceive the pain of another living creature does not mean that that pain does not exist. To see your pain in the actions that you take towards them. And in other words, if that action was being taken to you, try to be empathetic from the same perspective towards that other living creature.
I would gather from your academic studies and your life experience that certainly you have your perspective is very much economic. So knowing that and knowing how economics works, are you still optimistic about the notion of sustainability itself? Since we are in an economy that emphasizes growth and production, will our own sustainable practices really make a difference? How do you maintain that optimism?
Well, I think the primary problem that we have in this country, in the United States, is our educational system, period. The connecting of the dots between growth and well-being are easy to understand once you actually have time to contemplate what you're doing and how it fits into your own well-being. But if you don't have the opportunity to think about those things, or no one ever really talks to you about evaluating why you're doing something, or evaluating your purpose and understanding and comprehending your mortality, because all of those things are tied very much together in the decision making and the framing of our own individual existence, then how would you ever question your concept of freedom is absolute? It doesn't come with any kind of responsibility, because no one has really articulated that to you. And unfortunately, we have done a very poor job, and we're continuing to do a very poor job, which is reflected in the US literacy rates of 86% in this country, compared to developing countries such as Latvia, which is it says 100%, or Sri Lanka at 92%, or Turkey at 94%. That says a lot about why we have such a difficulty or challenge with regard to making a change. People need to understand why they need to make a change. And for those communities where perhaps means separate but equal education, where they have not necessarily been able to get intergenerational quality education, we need to speak to them in a different way. We need to educate people for their own well-being in order for us to transform our economy to represent that well-being, because all our economy will ever do is reflect the majority perception of the population. So it's not that the economic framework is something that's beyond our ability to change. It's what you put in, values out. Yes. So if you go into a market or a consumer-based situation with no value for the animal, no value for the quality of food, that's going to be what you buy. And that's going to affect your health afterwards. And more than likely, it's going to exacerbate those negativities, because the lack of value for that animal leads to a lack of quality food for you, right? And that affects your health system. But if you go into the system thinking that how we treat things affects the quality of the food that we receive from them, whether it be milk or meat, and then you buy based on that, then those are the types of products that are going to exist. And that's going to also be generated in your economic framework. It's going to be quality in, quality out. And it's going to effectively impact almost every aspect of your economy. So sustainability is based on my value structure of how I operate as an individual within a system. It doesn't necessarily mean that the system itself has to change. But the one thing I will say is that the economic indicator that we use, which is based on growth, more production, would probably have to change to some extent, or have another indicator in parallel with it that actually measures well-being. GDP was never meant as a measure for well-being. It was only meant as a measure for production capacity. How it's become used as a measure for well-being is unfortunate, because it gives people a very false perception of a lot of things. We have a high GDP, but we also have an increasing number of people who live under the poverty line, who live in hunger in this country, right?
Yes.
So,
and a health system, many people who are simply unwell, and much of that is because of diet. And so, and again, food choice. So
yeah, but the poor have no food choice. So, you know, this is the part where I think the vicious cycle is perhaps the most evident, is poor people living in food deserts without any access to food, being reliant on public transportation to get to a proper grocery store, buying their foods from convenience stores, and then being exempt. They actually are the perfect example of the obesity, endocrine disruption, cardiovascular disease, heightened salt intake, and other kinds of unhealthy elements that lead to obesity and diabetes as well. Well, that's a perfect living example of what happens when you don't have access to quality food right there. But unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle of those that are the most vulnerable and have no other choice.
Yes, and certainly we have seen this, the pandemic has revealed this. So when you speak about literacy, it's a special kind of literacy. And I think sustainable practices is aiming at educating the public. I know you have podcasts and films, and I would encourage viewers to check your website, sustainablepracticesltd.org, and how can those podcasts and films that obviously cover material you've spoken about today, how can our viewers access that material?
We keep everything on our website. Our radio show is also part of that podcast series. The podcasts originally are aired on WOMR. And so we have an active relationship with them. So our podcasts are also housed on their website, but everything is also on ours. We also do forums, educational forums. We had one that started off this year on the economics of sustainability, which was a 6-part series. And then we did a very short one on the economics of race. And we just finished in April the Cape Community Water Forum. We had a couple of other partners with us in that, including the APCC, Association to Protect Cape Cod, Sierra Club Cape Cod, and 350 Cape Cod as our partner organizations.
What I would encourage you is to check your website to access some of that really important information. And also, it seems that perhaps our schools, health courses are given at all levels, and it may be that we can hope that in some of the health courses, these concerns about food and quality food and the kinds of choices we make when we shop might be taught. Do you see any sign of this in any of the schools, perhaps, that you may have visited?
The issue really is the elevation of nutrition into something that's important for students to learn, as not as much as the need for a health class. I think these types of opportunities to really talk about healthy eating and the importance of it have always been around. It's unfortunate that it's not been connected to more of a serious nature. And so I think that's where we could actually add some value, is if the health classes could be taught from the standpoint of really assessing our economic system, of really putting in an understanding of the things that we need compared to the things that we want, and yes, our need to actually realign our values to our needs, not our wants. We pay, again, like we discussed a moment ago, we pay nothing for air, we pay nothing for water, we pay very little for our food. And those are the basic things that we actually need to live. And we pay so much more for all these other things that really, in many ways, don't add to the value of our life and actually add perhaps more to the pollution that we have to face going forward than if we lived more simply and had quality elements through those other areas. But one thing that you just also mentioned that I think it's really important for those types of courses to take into consideration is the life cycle impact of food production. Because not only is it related directly to the food, but it's related to almost any other product. If we could get our young people and our old people and the people in between to start thinking about life cycles related to everything we consume, we would make better decisions. If you started to think about the inputs in the production process and the fertilizers, the pesticides, the adverse consequences of both in terms of both groundwater and also bees, for example, as we know that we're so needing on bees, so dependent upon bees. The transportation costs. So buying local has a lot of value because you reduce those transportation costs. You can also get food fresher and have it naturally grown to its maturation. People don't recognize that when we buy things that are centralized, they actually get matured in the truck itself. That's why they look so perfect, because they're getting bombarded with ethylene in the truck and then ripened to a right color, but they don't ever taste as good as when you get something that's vine ripened. And then that affects your health when you consume it. And then as you brought up, in this case, the disposal, when we talked about this very briefly, when we dispose animal waste, for example, that's been grown in a horrific commercialized existence where the animals never had a quality of life because it's only been grown to be consumed, and it's been grown with growth hormones as well as antibiotics. When you throw that food away, or even when you actually digest it and dispose of it through human waste, you're leaving a trail of that chemical component that now exists in the community that you live in.
Yes.
So when you start to think about things from a sustainability perspective, it does always go back to a moral and ethical perspective, because whatever we have done wrong around the chain in terms of taking advantage of the vulnerable, which is the environment and other species or even other humans, it comes back to us at the end.
Yes. What you're saying makes a great deal of sense. I cannot thank you enough for coming to this program and talking about that. Certainly, we have much to think about and to consider. And so I will thank you for being with us Viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next time on Conversations with Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.